go right now to criminal defense attorney Seth J. Zuckerman. He's joining us here at our pop-up studio across the street from federal court. And Seth, you just came from the DA's office. You're running around. And when you heard about this in a federal case, that the jury's saying, okay, on day 2 they have a partial verdict, what do you think about that?
Well, Lisa, they had gone hours today without any notes, without anything coming from the jury. And then to hear that they had a partial verdict was a little surprising to me. The judge obviously wanted the input of both parties to decide, well, what do we do next? The racketeering count, RICO count 1, is obviously, as you said, the most serious count that he's facing, but also the hardest for the government to prove in this case. The verdict on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5 is not surprising at an earlier phase. And what we're waiting to hear right now is whether or not the judge is going to give the Allen charge, which is a charge you give to a jury when they tell you initially that they can't reach a verdict, and the judge tells them you need to go back and try a little harder. You need to try and persuade your fellow jurors. Now, what I'm hearing is that there were multiple jurors on each side who said that they couldn't be persuaded one way or another, but still it's incumbent upon the judge at this point to give an Allen charge at an appropriate time to encourage the jurors to go back and deliberate more. But what's unclear is whether or not the judge has done that already. What I do know is that he has not taken a partial verdict on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5, so we don't know yet what the verdict is on those counts.
So have you ever heard of a partial verdict in a federal case like this?
Oh, yes. Partial verdicts happen all the time. It's incumbent upon the judge, however, not to take the partial verdict immediately and to let the jury complete their deliberations. If at the end of the day the jury is hung and they can't come to a verdict on count 1, he'll take a partial verdict on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5. But it happens fairly regularly where they come to a partial verdict and then they get hung on other counts, and then it's up to the prosecution as to whether or not they want to retry that count.
But then does it happen this early on in the deliberations? I mean, we're only at day 2. Yesterday it seemed like the jury was having trouble even with the instructions. This morning things seemed to be moving along pretty quickly, then kind of nothing this afternoon. You know, they were getting transcripts and that type of thing, going over it. But is it uncommon to have that happen just like on day 2 of deliberations?
Lisa, it's really hard to predict what a jury's doing in the back. As a criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor, I've sat there for hours and days trying to figure out what a jury's doing back there, and it's impossible to figure out at all times. So is it surprising? No. We obviously don't know the discussions that were going on back there. This is obviously only the second day of deliberations. Yesterday the jury asked to leave early. That to me was a sign that they weren't close to any verdict, because if they were close to a verdict they probably would have wanted to stay. But today they got a full day in. They were deliberating for a number of hours without any interruptions because they had limited notes, and clearly they reached a partial verdict and decided that they couldn't be persuaded on count 1.
So when they say the terminology, and help us with the terminology so we understand this clearly, when they say they can't be persuaded, is this the same thing as a hung jury, or we just don't know? Like they feel like they've just hit a wall and can't go beyond it?
It's foreshadowing a hung jury. So it's not the judge isn't allowing them to be declared a hung jury quite yet, but this is the first step in a later hung jury. So the judge is giving them more time, encouraging them to go back and try to persuade one another, because like you said, they haven't had that much time back there together. So this is the first step, and if they come back and say, Judge, we really just can't reach a verdict on this count, he has to make a determination along with the parties as what do we do next. He probably will ask them to go back for a number of hours, likely tomorrow, if they say that they can't be persuaded this evening, and then take a verdict probably by the end of the day tomorrow if they say they can't be persuaded, or depending on what the notes say.
Okay, if you're just joining us now, we have breaking news here at the federal court in the RICO sex trafficking trial of Sean Diddy. Combs, the jury late this afternoon sending a note to the court that they had reached a verdict on counts 2 through 5, which is the 2 counts of sex trafficking and 2 counts of transportation for prostitution across state lines, and that they could not reach any agreement on the RICO count. The judge we're talking about what the judge's options are right now. Both the prosecution and defense indication has been that they want the jury to go back and continue deliberating because it's only day 2. Yesterday we heard that they were having trouble with instructions. This morning they made more requests, and then this afternoon this bombshell announcement that they had reached a verdict that quickly on 2 of the the 3 major charges, which contained 4 of the 5 counts that Combs was facing. So that's what's happening here. We're talking about what the possible pathways forward. Seth, let's talk about that. So if you do get a hung jury, can you have a hung jury on one of the charges?
Absolutely. So there can be a hung jury on count 1 and then take a verdict on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then it's up to the government as to what they want to do with that charge, or whether or not they want to retry it or not retry Mr. Combs on that count. But that's absolutely possible that they could have a hung jury on 1 count and have a verdict on the other 4 counts. And as you know, we still don't know the verdict on those 4 counts.
Right, exactly.
They could be split on those counts as well. It's probably unlikely at this point, the fact that they came to a verdict at the same time on all 4 of those counts. It's probably the same verdict on each of those 4 counts. But as I said before, with a jury, you just never know.
We really don't know. And then in terms of how long they can go, if the jury says, if the judge says, you know, we want you to go back and continue deliberating, then can they continue deliberating? He told them they could if they want to, past 4 or 5 o'clock.
Yeah, and they could deliberate for another few days. It depends on the notes that they send to the judge. You know, the judge at this point told them to go back and deliberate further, and that I'm not taking a partial verdict at this point. But it could be, they could go back and they could deliberate for a day, 2 days, 3 days. After you receive an instruction from the judge, it depends on what notes the jury sends to the judge at this point. They could send a note first thing tomorrow morning saying, we're never going to reach a verdict on this, and then the judge has to decide. But if he doesn't hear back from the jury any further tomorrow or the following day, well, that could also change things.
All right, and obviously the crowd is building outside the courtroom because there's a lot of buzz about this, and there have been a lot of people that are following this case very, very closely. Do you think at this point that the jury has, that they've gone through nearly 2 months of testimony, that they kind of already walked into those deliberations with some idea of what they would find, or is that just too much supposition for us to make at this point?
No, I think that's fair. I've spoken to a lot of jurors over my time in trying cases, and yeah, they generally have an inclination when they walk into the jury room. They do deliberate fairly, but they probably had an idea when they walked back there, and they had a fair discussion with each other about the evidence or lack thereof on the counts. And as all of the legal commentators had predicted, count 1 was always the most challenging for the government. I'm not surprised that there are jurors who had dug their heels in each direction on count 1. It was always a very aggressive charge by the government, and so I'm not surprised to hear that the jurors are having a hard time with that count.
All right, let's check in with our anchors. Bianca, Natasha, any questions from you guys?
Yeah, Lisa, even without that RICO charge, how serious are the other charges, and what kind of prison time would Diddy be facing if convicted on charges 2 through 5?
Okay, I'm going to pass that on to Seth right now. So, Seth, Natasha's asking the RICO charges, aside from that, the sex trafficking, 2 counts of that, 2 counts of the transportation for prostitution. What kind of sentences would those carry if he's found guilty of those?
Well, so it's a lesser sentence than the RICO charge, but they still face heavy guidelines. Now, obviously, it's up to the judge at the end of the day, and I'm sure a sentencing would be hard fought, but I don't think we're there yet, right? We don't even have a verdict quite yet.
Right.
There's a partial verdict, and we don't know what that verdict is. But, you know, like I said, the sentence on those charges are less than the RICO charge.
Which could be decades.
Which could be decades. But I'm sure Mr. Combs still faces a very substantial sentence by the judge under the sentencing guidelines on those counts.
All right, Seth J. Zuckerman, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it and helping us with it. We're reporting live from federal court here, where the jury sent a note saying that they had reached a partial verdict in the Sean Diddy Combs RICO sex trafficking case. We're not quite sure what's been happening the last couple of minutes because we've been out here trying to get the word out, but we'll find out and we'll get back to you with more as this story develops. But I'm going to send it back to the studio to Bianca and Natasha right now. Back to you guys.